Having previously thought that Hawaii was just sandy beaches and resorts and so on, and I was so amazed to find this large mountainous interior with canyons and special forests that exist nowhere else in the world.
Rainbows and waterfalls, green valleys down below. Well, I'm up on Koke'e.
I'm the program coordinator for the Koke'e Resource Conservation Program.
Located in northwestern Kauai, 15 miles up the windy and steep Waimea Canyon Drive, you will find a different Hawaii than the one you think you know. A Hawaii far removed from the sandy beaches and oceanfront views. A Hawaii deep in the heart of a mountain and deep in the heart of its people. It is here at the 15-mile marker you find the beginnings of a truly unique paradise. It is here you find Koke'e State Park.
Well, I had worked for the Koke'e Natural History Museum for 4 years, and they had a volunteer training series for volunteer hike guides and so on, and we would go on guided hikes, and they would talk about what's happening in the forest, and one of the things that was happening was the invasive species were taking over. And the head of state parks, Wayne Souza, would have a service project where we go and pull weeds in the forest, and everyone seemed to enjoy it, and so I thought there should be a framework for people to plug into that anytime. And so I took a grant writing workshop and got the first grant that I wrote, and so started the program.
Invasive weeds are simply plants that have been introduced from other areas that have no natural predators in their new location. They have the ability to thrive in areas other plants are challenged and have a high capacity to reproduce. Sometimes these plants have been imported from other areas as crops or ornamentals, or their seeds have been dispersed through the wind or by animals. This has become a huge problem for island ecosystems.
Well, the ecosystems on an island are more fragile than the mainland ones. They're more susceptible to degradation and population pressures and so on. And plus you have this huge numbers of plants that evolved here in isolation that exist nowhere else in the world. They're endemic, and so there's more at stake.
In many areas of Koke'e, the native forest and its ecosystems are being completely destroyed by the infiltration and complete takeover of weeds. Although there are many different invading species, the Nature Conservancy decided to focus on only 3 particularly invasive ones, these being Kahili ginger, strawberry guava, and the Australian tree fern. Despite the fragility of Kauai's environments, there are a few other factors that have lent a helping hand to the invasives.
Well, there's factors like the hurricanes certainly made the situation a lot more friendly to the invasive weeds, because it just knocked down a lot of the big trees in the forest, and all these light gaps, the invasives could jump in easier because the natives are slower to grow. And so that's one factor. There's factors in the plants themselves. The strawberry guava in particular is allelopathic. It puts out a toxin against other plants, and so nothing else grows under it. Once it gets to be a thicket of guava, you have nothing else. And also if they grow in shade, that makes the weed worse. If it can grow in dense shade, and if birds spread it, they can drop the seeds, and you can have a total full canopy, perfect native forest, and the birds will spread those seeds in there, they'll start growing, and they'll displace the natives.
The invasive strawberry guava was introduced to Kauai in 1825 from Brazil. It was brought here for its fruit. The toxins that it releases stops the germination of other seeds, so it literally kills everything that grows around it, while it forms a large single-species stand of trees. It can grow 6 to 20 feet tall, and with its glossy green leaves, completely shade out an area. The wild pigs in Kauai, also an introduced invasive species, eat the guava fruit and then spread the seeds to new areas. It is not uncommon to find a tiny stand of seedlings on pig trails where the seeds have germinated in the pig's waste.
We're only taking it out of selected areas that are still pretty native. There's hundreds of acres of almost solid strawberry guava areas around, plenty for the pigs and the hunters, that we'll never touch. And besides, that will kind of pull the pigs out of the native areas if we take the guava out of there, and then they'll all be in the guava areas and easier to hunt maybe. So anyway, but it definitely totally replaces the native forest.
For now, there is only one method that the Koke'e Resource Conservation Program can use to attempt to eradicate this species.
We pull them if we can, or we notch them with a machete around the base and apply a little bit of Garlon herbicide with a little drip bottle, squirt bottle. So it's very specific to the tree, and it's barely enough to kill it. We don't get 100% kill rate generally. We get pretty close, but we know we're not putting more than we need.
The worst of the three, and labeled as a superweed ecological emergency by the Nature Conservancy in 2007, is the Australian tree fern. The fern was introduced in the 1940s as an ornamental and became popular due to its rapid growth. Its fronds can reach up to 12 feet long and 3 feet wide, and can attain heights of up to 30 feet or more. The Australian tree fern will very quickly crowd and shade out other native ferns and plants as it aggressively takes over in disturbed areas.
It's spread by spores, which blows in the wind, which means it's the spread of it is even more unpredictable than bird spreading. It can spread farther, and basically we either pull them or we chop out the top, cut off the apical meristem, the growing tip, and put a little garland on that. The ginger was brought here in the 1930s. By a local cabin owner, and she was told it was the only thing that would grow under the eucalyptus trees that were by her cabin. And of course that's a red flag already, because if it grows where nothing else grows, that because the eucalyptus is allelopathic, which kills other plants. So anyway, the ginger sat in her garden for about 20 years, and then in the 50s they saw it spreading out in the forest, so it took a while for the birds to learn they like the seeds. We pull it if we can, we clip it and put escort herbicide on the stump, but the small ones we pull, we even have to put a little herbicide on, because they'll still reroot even if they're hanging in the trees. That's how robust it is. And now it has spread over 8,000 acres, and it's spread clear over past Wainiha Valley to, that's about, 9 miles or something out through the swamp. And it's from Nepal, from the Himalayas. So it grows it really loves the high, wet, cool areas like the Alakai swamp.
Fernando Pinalosa describes the Alakai best in chapter 1 of his book, The Alakai, Kauai's Unique Wilderness. Situated on northwestern Kauai, high up in the clouds, it is like no other place in the world, featuring incredibly beautiful rainforest with some 24 bogs, manifesting a great diversity of plants, insects, and birds, many found nowhere else. It has been called Kauai's greatest biological treasure. It may very well be Kauai's greatest treasure, period. Like all treasures, it needs protection.
People have the question, is just green good enough? What if you just have guava trees in your watershed? Is that good enough? But it's really important to keep it native, because the native forest has all these different layers, the mosses and the ferns and the shrubs and the whole canopy, and it holds and absorbs the water better and yields it to the water table. And so the landowners in the Kauai Watershed Alliance all decided it was important to keep it native. Actually, the Alakai Wilderness Preserve, the Nature Conservancy, has targeted that because it's already highly native, and so you get more bang for your buck. And they did helicopter surveys to find the outliers of the weeds and keep them from going all the way to Wai'ale'ale. So when you can strategize like that, they drew a defensible line, and we're getting everything beyond the defensible line. It seems doable. In the rest of the park and so on, we pick areas, that are 75% native or more still, so that it preserves that seed bank, and it can come back native a lot easier because it has the canopy to yield seeds after you take out the weeds. But I certainly think it's worth it as long as we have volunteers to help. If we just had paid staff, I don't know that we could get enough done to stay ahead of much of anything.
There's just too much to do and not enough hands to get it all done. Unfortunately, there's no time to waste, as Kauai loses both flora and fauna species every year to extinction.
There's quite a lot on Kauai. In the whole islands, there's 639 endangered plants and 194 threatened, and there's 256 already went extinct. Oh, wow. And actually over 30% of the U.S. list of endangered plants are Hawaiian plants, and it's a fraction of the land mass. So Hawaii's become called the endangered capital of the world.
All is not lost yet. There are still too many people who have dedicated their lives to saving the precious forests of Kauai. Just recently, on March 10th, 2010, 48 Kauai species were listed as federally endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, now giving these species complete protection.
Oh, Koke'e, here I am with you again. Oh, Koke'e, walking hand in hand again.
The volunteers really contribute a lot. We can, give a day or two's training. Fortunately, the ginger is very easy to recognize, doesn't need much training. We can have kids groups pull ginger, and basically, weeding is you just need bodies out in the forest that can recognize them, and we teach them the native plants too, so they can appreciate what they're saving. They just help us get a lot more acres done, and they help make it fun too. All the sharing and everything is it's really makes the work enjoyable, even though it's very routine work. Oh well, we prefer that they have a real interest in learning plants and are avid hikers. Very strenuous. It's very strenuous work that we do. So they should be inclined to like gardening and weeding already.
Volunteers come to Koke'e from all over the world. They help from anywhere between an afternoon or morning to a few months at a time. In the time between 1998 and 2007, the Koke'e Resource Conservation Program had almost 19,000 volunteers give their time, 61% of these being local. These volunteers logged over 86,000 hours of work, and at a rate of $17 per hour, if they were paid labor, the program saved almost $1.5 million. Between 1998 and 2007, the volunteers killed almost 8 million weeds, which were kept track of on counters as the volunteers worked. Volunteers are the foundation of work that is done in Koke'e. As Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle said during World War II, there is nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer.
We're in the Koke'e CCC camp, which was built by President Roosevelt's Make Work program during the Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they built it in 1935-36. Anyway, so the camp can provide housing for volunteers and researchers who work in these natural areas, because we're pretty isolated from the towns and so on.
Volunteers that stay at the CC camp work 4 10-hour days and return for 7 days accommodation. Sometimes there are many volunteers here at once, and other times you may be the only one staying in the isolated cabins. However, at the camp you will find everything you need, from a solar heated shower, to a laundry and dryer, to a very full kitchen with lots of storage to accommodate a number of people at a time. It does get very cold at night in the mountains, but have no fear, there are heaters you can cozy up to in the evenings to read a book in the library, or relax with other volunteers in the living room. There's a volunteer computer which runs on dial-up internet, and a phone in the bunkhouse to provide long-term volunteers with most of the comforts of home. The volunteer day starts at 7 a.m. at the tool shed, where you prepare the tools required for the day's task. You may also have time in the mornings to educate yourself in the program's nursery. Once all the herbicides are prepared by the staff, the trucks can be loaded and another day of saving the forest can begin. While volunteering on a long-term basis, you may have the opportunity to go on remote camping trips with the Nature Conservancy to eliminate weeds in very hard-to-reach areas where the majority of the forest is still native and still very savable.
Well, so the Nature Conservancy, when they wrote the watershed management plan, they wanted to keep all the weeds from moving out to Wai'ali'ali, and so they drew a defensible line. And basically, the defense beyond the defensible line, most of that is kind of difficult to get very much work done in a day if you've got to hike there and back. If you have like a 3 or 4 hour hike to get there, you know, you don't have much time to work before you have to leave again. So it's necessary to camp out there, and in fact, quite a few of the areas it takes a day to get there or a day to get back. So, and we found that actually the cost per acre, the time it takes to weed per acre, is so directly related to the density of weeds. And when you get out there and you don't have that much density of weeds, even with the helicopter costs and logistics of getting people there, it's still cheaper per acre than here in the park where you have a lot more weeds and you just don't move very far in a day. So, yeah, and they're pretty rugged. These can't, especially now. We had one canceled this morning because it's too windy and for the helicopter to get in there. And sometimes we get in there and we work, and then they can't come and get us out, and we have to walk out. So we always have to be prepared. We're just amazed at the numbers of people that come here from all over the world that want to just give and help save this very unique forest here.
Hawaii is not just sunsets and surfing, suntans and starry nights. And when it comes to protecting our environment, just green is not good enough. In the heart of a mountain on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there lies some of the most remarkable forests in all the world, and some of the most remarkable people doing everything in their power to save it.
Oh.